you. Yes, please take a seat. Sí.
La Catalina, la Agustina ya está en...
Sí, please have a seat. We are waiting for Thelma and Francisca. So please, Thelma, have a seat, and Francisca, por favor.
Catalina. Creo que la Catalina preguntó.
So thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here in this paradigm shift and climate change panel. So we are together. So my name is Patricia Morales. I'm the CEO of Philanthropy Corte Solari, and I'm going to moderate this panel. And we are here with Émilie de Moinet, Thelma Krug, Carlos Duarte, and Francisca Cortés Solari. So before presenting them, just explaining a little bit the background of this panel. So we know that according to the IPCC data, humans are responsible for global warming of 1.1 from 1900 to the present days. So a systematic and collaborative paradigm shift is urgently required. This means rethinking the type of solution implemented to the dates and adapting them to today's needs. According to the IPCC 6th Assessment Report 2021 for the period 1960 and 2019, the two main greenhouse gases have been carbon dioxide and methane. In the case of the former, about 2/3 is due to the burning of fossil fuels and 1/3 to land use. For the latter, the situation is reversed, with 1/3 coming from fuels and 2/3 from agriculture and waste management. Developed countries with high emission levels have the opportunity to promote the decarbonization of hard-to-supply, heat-intensive industrial sector, such as the iron and steel sector, aluminium, and the chemical industry, through the use of green hydrogen produced from the electrolysis of water. So, climate change is not only an environmental threat to the planet, it's also a social, economic, and cultural one that directly affects people in all dimensions of their life. This issue requires collaboration between the public and private sector to change the production model toward one that guarantees and promotes development and sustainable economic growth. The World Bank warns that without urgent action, the impact of climate change could push an additional 100 million people into poverty by 2030. And to build a more beneficial growth model, society must focus on clean energy system, developing smarter, more compact, connected, and coordinated city. Also relevant is sustainable land use, which could generate economic benefit among others. So, today we are going to have in this panel, first of all, Émilie de Moinet. Émilie de Moinet is a PhD in biology in charge of eco-responsible mission at Université Côte d'Azur. Created in 2018, this unit aimed to involve the university community to think together, propose and experiment the implementation of concrete actions to improve the quality of life in the workplace in connection with formation and research, sustainable development, and solidarity. Welcome, Émilie. Then we are going to have Thelma Krug. Thelma Krug is the IPCC Vice Chair. She is a former researcher at the Earth Observation Coordination at the National Institute for Space Research in Brazil under the Ministry of Science, Technology, Innovation and Communication. She holds a PhD on spatial statistics from the University of Sheffield, UK, and for more than 15 years she represents Brazil in the negotiation at the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, with particular focus on issues related to land use. Her main areas of interest are climate change and the role of deforestation, forest degradation and land use change, and natural greenhouse gas inventories. Welcome, Telma. Then we have Carlos Duarte. Carlos Duarte is the Tarek Hamed Jufali Research Chair in the Red Sea Ecology and King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, and Executive Director of the Global Coral Research and Development Accelerator Platform. He held academic positions in Spain, Australia, Norway, and Denmark, and served as President of the American Society of Limnology and Oceanography. Author of over 900 scientific papers, Carlos develops ocean-based solutions to global challenges, including climate change, and rebuild the abundance of marine life. He has been ranked as the top marine biologist and the 12th most influential climate scientist in the world. It's a pleasure to have you here, Carlos Duarte. Thank you to be here. And we also have Francisca Cortez Solari. Francisca is a philanthrope, conservationist, and entrepreneur who is passionate about nature. What started out as an education program for school children from vulnerable populations led to the creation of the Caserta Foundation in 2003, and later to Philanthropy Cortez Solari, an initiative that promotes the comprehensive and sustainable development in Chile and the rest of the country through science education, culture, and conservation, and which operate throughout the country and the region. She has received numerous awards for her work in philanthropy, science, and conservation. Very welcome, Francisca, to this panel. So I'm going to give the floor, first of all, to Emily.
Hi, thanks, that's fine. So I'm going to present what we are doing at Université Côte d'Azur in order to take advantage of the university to really use it as a use case to test and support behavior changes and to address paradigm shift. You can go. So as we have discussed in the introduction, the human activities are really the cause of the global warming.
Just a second, because we have a technical issue. We're going to solve this, just to be sure that you can make your presentation properly. I give you the microphone.
Thanks.
Yeah, so because she's the only one who has a PPT, we're going to start. No? No, we are going to start with Emilio. That's fine.
Okay, so hi again. I can go? Okay, so you can switch to the other one. Yeah, but it's not working. Okay, thanks. So in France, the average of the carbon footprint per French habitant is about to 10 tons of carbon of CO2 equivalent. Okay. And we really need to reduce it until to 2 tons up to 2050. So we really need to address individual and collective and institutional behavior change, really profound and major. And this is really important to do this in order to create some desirable future and attractive future. So to do so, what we are doing at the university is taking the advantage of all the diversity of the university actors, all the competencies also, so staff, student, researcher, but all the local economy system we are in, civil society, association, and so on, in order to experiment, to co-create, to share, in order to inspire and reinforce the cohesion to make these campuses and sites as demonstrator for tomorrow. And this will really help, we think, to create this desirable and attractive future. So the basic principle is really to exit the linear economy we are in, where we throw away, in order to go to a circular economy where we're going to think completely differently the way to use resources by making them, but reusing, sharing, repair, recycling, in order to have the less and the limited impact on the waste production. So basically, the really thing is also to address and to rethink our needs, because behavior change really implicates to change our needs and to change our way to think, because it's not going to be to change something by something else. And to think to have the hierarchy of the research needs, and to have the buying option at really the latest option, and really think differently, totally differently, from what we need and from how we are going to act with the zero waste, for example, concept. You can go. So to do so at the university, what we have done is to create different panels of action. So education and sensibilization action in order to raise the awareness and support the change, the behavior changes, to make some local and replicable action in order to experiment, inspire, federate, and share, and more transformative projects in order to transform the university and to promote and share the action outside from the ecosystem. So for example, for the education, action, and sensibilization, we really try to have some ludic and inspirative, attractive action in order to not to speak to only the convinced people, but to speak to everybody. And to do so, we are doing some participatory activities, climate issues, zero waste, eco-responsibility, behavior, animation, even free markets, and so on. The university really to help to change the behavior. Then after, we are doing and replicable actions. So for example, to address purchase and consumption, what we are doing is to do some repair coffee, which is some place where people can come and fix their object, learn, and share some experience, and make some cohesion. So we are doing that. The other stuff is to develop low-tech workshop and some experimentation. All this stuff are in association with training and research. We are doing some economy, circular economy. So for example, for the university materials, such as tarpaulin, we are doing some bags, plenty of different things. And the thing is that we are doing that in order to put that in the communication and change the way we behave also. We are doing some, you can go, to soft mobility, because mobility is a very easy to address, and the same to improve that by doing co-reparation, training, events, and so on, and reuse action like composting on campuses, experimentation, vermicomposts, and so on, and permaculture garden with the use of vegetable, and do-it-yourself workshop. So. Finally, we are doing some transformative project where we address this kind of different question, like the sustainable food question in campuses, because we really need to be exemplary. So with more local, more sustainable, more reduced meat, and so on, in order to reduce our carbon footprint. Eco-responsible events, sharing platform in order to share the different stuff we have in laboratories, campuses, and between individuals, and working with the ecosystem really to develop the soft mobility. Finally, we really need to go faster. And to go faster, we really need to still some change, some behavior at the university. So to do so, what we propose is really to work on a more transversal collaboration and organization at the university in order to reduce our way to think and the silos approaches which are done in many different places. Finally, really to really work on education for everybody, like the student, but also the teacher, the governance, everybody. It's really important, and we need to have this based on the level of study and education, and address these really concrete action. Involve and facilitate and value the people engaged, because plenty of people are engaged, but we are not able to value them correctly. So this is really something we have to do and become much more exemplary, because still there are still issues to address at the university, and we need to before teaching students and telling them what to do, we need to become more exemplary at all. So finally, all these events and tackle these socio-ecological issues is really also a big chance and an opportunity to reinforce and enhance the cohesion between all the actors, because it's really something where people can share, be together and build this new future more desirable, and where everyone will find its place. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Emily. I'm going to make a lot of questions after the presentation of each one. So now I'm going to give the floor to Thelma. Welcome, Thelma.
Thanks, Patricia, and good morning, everybody. It's really nice to be here and talking about something that is a little bit intriguing. So when I was invited to talk about a paradigm shift and relate this to climate change, I said, okay, let me start by trying to understand really what a paradigm is. And if I understand what a paradigm is, then I can know what a paradigm shift entails. I usually like to look for definitions, or when I start a presentation, I always like to see if we're on the same, in the same footing, right, of understanding. Because not necessarily everybody knows some of the climate change language, like, for instance, mitigation. When I first heard the word mitigation, I said, well, what they are talking about? So I had to understand the thing. So through time, I learned that sometimes it's very helpful to start seeing if everybody is understanding the same way, the same thing. And definitions go very differently, as you're going to see from my presentation. I hope. So anyway, when we are thinking about a paradigm, we are thinking about a set of ideas, perspectives, a way of looking at things. So when you're talking about a paradigm shift, you are talking about a movement, right? Like many authors say, a mindset shift. So that is really a transformation, change, as some also say. And when we are trying to relate a paradigm shift to climate change, we already can see this happening in many sectors. So we see new ways of building, how the cities are developing, how agriculture is moving into a different way of doing things. And I believe, but I am not certain about this, that even the traditional knowledge, even the indigenous peoples that have their culture very much set into principles that come from a long time, through climate change and the impacts that climate change are bringing with it, most likely they have to shift their minds towards the way they produce, they live, and they convey their knowledge. So a paradigm shift, and talking about the mindset shift, we see that it has already permeated some of the sector. So we are talking about industry, and industry has to have a paradigm shift from the way they produce if we want to be consistent or aligned with the Paris Agreement long-term temperature goals. There is no way out of that, right? So when we think about the development pathways, we see that emission pathways, I would say, we see this whole, the world is not going to be the same anymore. So there needs to be a completely mindset shift on the way we do things. Then when we try to relate paradigm shift with the convention. And that was interesting because when the Green Climate Fund was created, and that we are talking about decision 3 CP17, so basically 5 years ago, it was created to be a paradigm shift to promote low carbon and climate resilient development the pathways. So the word paradigm shift is linked to the Green Climate Fund. And so it was to promote this paradigm shift in developing countries so that they would move into a low carbon and also, these resilient pathways by what? By providing them with support, financial support basically, but not only that, but also capacity building and new ways of thinking, big projects, as Emily has shown, some initiatives that are really bringing what we are calling a transformational change. So we talk sometimes, about the need for one to have a transformative change or a transformation adaptation that is doing something completely different from the way traditionally it's done. So it's thinking ahead, it's thinking about something that is not within your perspectives of your set of ideas. So, but when we think about a paradigm shift, and then if we think about the Green Climate Fund, because this is an example here within the convention and in the context of sustainable development, it doesn't come out of the blue. So you may have the idea that you are going to have this transformation change, but at the same time, this transformation change comes with a lot of other things to back it up. And when we are talking about this, we are thinking about, for instance, the Green Climate Fund, providing guidance to countries to be more ambitious in their projects. But if they need to be more ambitious in their projects, how to do that? They need sometimes capacity building as well. And more than that, they need to be backed up by financial support. So if that doesn't come, there is no way one, in particular for some developing countries, would promote this transformation, this paradigm shift that is accompanied by institutional changes as well, behavioral changes that Emily mentioned about. So it comes like a big package to promote the paradigm shift. I don't think, honestly, that in the climate change scenario here, even in this forum, that we have already had a mindset shift collectively. So if this does not happen, it's very difficult that things will move in tandem, like a harmonized set of changes that need to come into place. So Patricia, this is basically, to start off. And I think that the main message is that any change, and we know about that, behavioral changes do not come from day to night. And changing the pathways to development to a climate resilient pathway, development pathway, bringing together adaptation and mitigation, be ready for the impacts and risks of climate change that entails you thinking different the way the architecture of the cities will go. We are going to have extremely hot days. So how can we think ahead and be prepared to alleviate, to ameliorate the risks that climate change is going to bring through these extreme events in particular, that are going to become more frequent, more intense, and this will require really, really a completely new way of thinking about how you do things in industry, in energy, in land use, in agriculture, in waste. We are talking about all the sectors. So this is a holistic transformation. And this is the message of the paradigm shift in climate change that I thank you.
Yes, in fact, I sent a PowerPoint presentation, so yes, so maybe perhaps we can change the speakers. I was trying to...
To word? You were trying to
no, yes,
word
I...
everyone.
No, I asked a couple times, but I could not.
Okay, shall we go with Francisca and then we come back? Okay, do you think so?
Si están buscando
Okay. I will be translating what Francisca mentions, all right? No hace tanta... Okay, here we are. Okay, thank you everyone for inviting me to this panel. I represent basically philanthropy. I represent the private world, which is really very important nowadays in order to address climate change. And that's where I like to stand from, because it's a huge value to be presented like that from MERI, which I precede. Also, Caserta Foundation. Started working with education because we think that education is finally what is going to change, help change from the kids, change the way of thinking, looking forward. So education has always been very important for us. As Thelma mentioned, it's really important to understand what a paradigm shift is. Humanity has always been faced to paradigm shifts. And obviously cultures and the territory makes us really different in what a paradigm is. It's not being located in a certain place in the world. Other paradigms are different. But nowadays, why we're here and what are these all needs to work to address climate change is because humanity is facing a paradigm shift which is really unique. And it's unique because these paradigms oblige us to understand what we need to change from every perspective. Because we have a problem is that we are not aligned with the resources that we have. There are a lot of human being populations growing and growing. We are still consuming as if nothing's happening. And finally, the resource such as water, which is the most important thing, greenhouse effect, are growing and growing every day. So it's not only that we are working to address climate change as a huge problem, but also to shift and change humanity, the way we think. It's like a call. We are made and obliged to make this change because we know that we are not going to achieve 2030 goals at the speed that we are working now. So we're still waiting. Presidents, politicians maybe take decisions, but we understand that the decisions have a problem. This decision-making process have a problem, which is the economy. How is economy sustainable? Because as a humanity, we have reached a to lower the okay? So obviously, the conflict is in climate change and how the world wants to keep on keeping this economy, this way of production. But the world still doesn't understand that that's not going to be possible to maintain both things at the same time. It's not going to be, it's not because I say so, but it's just not going to be possible because we're not going to have such resources anymore. I mean, in 8 years, Agenda 2030, we are still going to be working, but we are going to have food problems, general deaths because they don't have water, hydric crisis, demise. We know that as temperature rises, some other organisms get activated, and those organisms are unknown for us as human beings. So human being has a process in which it's included in that climate change. But humans, we are going to need adaptation as well. So, as to sum up, the conclusion would be that we are running out of time, that it's very important that civil society, public and private as well, can achieve common goals, stop lying to ourselves, so that we can understand that it's us, the human being, which are in danger of extinction. It's not that we want to save the world, but what we are trying is to make ourselves survive. It's because the earth is going to keep on surviving. Whales are still going to be there in the ocean. So, in a way, the earth is going to have the capacity to restore itself, but not us. We are going to have that problem. In this interaction, I think that it's very important when I talk about the virtuous triangle, social society, public and public places. And now I'm going to say something different. There is something that's really important. We have shifted from one paradigm, which were much patriarchy, and now the call is to get together, men and women, in that respect, in that diversity of thinking, because in a way, we need men, women need men need women. And I know that this teamwork and this diversity and relationship between men and women, we are also going in that respect as well. Kids are going to come as well in that respect. So we want to change the world. But first, we need to understand men and women and be able to respect each other. Get our hands and together walk the path, because each and every one of us has a value. And that together, of course, talking about as well as the virtuous triangle, but thinking collectively, thinking about our children and future generations, thinking about men-women relationship, so as to not to bias this conversation. That's the most important thing to achieve these challenges that we have nowadays as a humanity. Thank you very much.
Salam alaikum. Buenos días. Good morning. So first of all, I'd like to ask all all in the audience to join me in thanking Catalina for doing magic, because this is my third event this morning, and there are technical issues everywhere, not because any flaw in the organization, but because we don't have the luxury of a dress rehearsal. So as Francisca said, we are running out of time, and we don't have the time for dress rehearsals either here or at the planetary level. So Francisca has been able to do some magic and gather my slides, even though there was no internet connection. So thank you, Catalina. And I would also like to thank the organizers of the event for having me here, and also for the topic selected, which I think is hugely important, because we are somehow lost in the jargon and that we have fabricated to talk about climate change. We talk about carbon neutrality, negative emissions, things like that, which are also oxymorons, and we forget the fundamentals, which is how did we get to this situation and how we change. So I believe the topic of paradigm change is important, and that paradigm starts by this being the first panel where I'm in a minority as a male surrounded by females. So again, as Francisca mentioned, I think it is very important that we have a diversity of voices, and I'm very honored and proud to be surrounded by very smart ladies that have a lot to contribute. And also I'm humbled to be in Africa and Egypt for COP. I think it's fundamentally important that we come here, not only because we are in the African continent, but because we are in the shores of where much of civilization started. The first vessels that transported goods in the world were actually built in Egypt, and you can visit them by the pyramids. So it's with great humbleness and honor that I'm here joining you today to talk about paradigm shift. And while Catalina was doing her magic, I was preparing to talk without the slides. So then I thought, what is it that I can say without the slides? And I thought about the word paradigm. Because when I work with colleagues in the IPCC and IPBS, everybody's talking about transformative change, but nobody really tells me how do we achieve transformative change and how this comes about. So I actually prefer the word paradigm shift than transformative change, because paradigm shift is better defined. And I'd like to frame this definition of paradigm shift in the context of a book by a philosopher called Thomas Kuhn, that is a philosopher of science that wrote a book about the nature of science, the structure of scientific revolutions. And there he defined paradigm shift. So science, and I think society to some degree, because science just formalizes the knowledge that is embedded in society, then formulates a paradigm and operates under a paradigm until evidence that that paradigm is not working or is flawed accumulates. And society tends to defend that paradigm because shifting paradigms is always painful and it leads to a lot of change. So, but at some point, there's enough evidence that the paradigm is not working, that the paradigm is removed, and then a scientific revolution occurred and a new paradigm emerges. I think it is due time that we change the paradigm, and we need to think, what is the paradigm that brought us here? The paradigm that brought us here came with the Industrial Revolution, where harnessing energy gave us the thought that we can actually operate a society away from nature, right? So we harness energy, we dominate the world, and we are no longer subject to the laws of nature. So the paradigm that we need to rethink is abandon that paradigm, that technology is going to save us, and go back to understand how nature works and embed the way we operate in the way nature works. So there's a lot of discussion also here about technology fixes. Okay, technology is going to save us once again, but maybe not. Maybe the paradigm shift is that we need to look closer at nature and try to embed the way we operate within the laws of nature. So if I can have the next slide, I will try to explain what I mean. So this is a photograph from the milestone of the Accord of Paris in 2015. And then Article 4 says that the Paris Agreement aims at achieving a balance between anthropogenic emissions by sources and removals by sinks of greenhouse gases by the second half of this century. In fact, if you think about this, what they're talking about is we're going to work in the same way that nature works, because nature manages carbon in a circular economy. So it's as much carbon removed from the atmosphere as it is returned to the atmosphere every year through the biosphere. So basically, the Paris Agreement seeks to embed human operations in the way nature works. And that seems to me to be a good idea. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So this is a very busy diagram, but I will simplify it. So along with my friend and colleague Bill McDonough, who's actually the father of the concept of the circular economy, with his book Cradle to Cradle, we put forward a framework on how society can manage carbon, which is through a circular economy. But we actually need two circular economies, because now we have the biosphere, but we also have the technosphere. And last year, for the first time, the mass of human-built objects exceeded the mass of living organisms in the planet. So the technosphere is very important and needs to be managed, as it was said earlier, in a circular manner. So how do we achieve this circularity? We have to reduce the use of materials and the use of greenhouse gases. We have to reuse and recycle materials, but also we have to remove, because we have accumulated a stock of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that is a risk not only for us, but for future generations. So how do we remove? On the left side of the slide, then we have technology fixes, direct carbon capture and other fixes, and on the right hand, you have nature-based solutions. So if we can go to the next slide. Yes, I would like to pause a bit to talk about nature-based solutions. And in the impenetrable jargon of climate science, there's a term of the carbon budget called land use change. In fact, it's very flawed, because some of these actually coming from destroying ecosystems on the ocean, including whales. So it's not just land, it's land and oceans. And this is 38% of the stock of accumulated greenhouse gases comes from messing up with ecosystems. And currently, this is still about 24% of annual emissions, and is the only component that continues to grow. So it follows, but if we want to fix the problem, 38% of the solution can come from repairing nature, from undoing the damage we did to nature. Next slide, please. So when we rebuild nature, we are not just mitigating carbon. And I think that Francisca also said something very important, is that we don't have a single problem. We have a multiple problem. Climate change is a systemic problem, but it's surrounded by other crises of biodiversity, food, population. And we need to understand that nature-based solutions are about rebuilding the fabric that supports our well-being. So 2 years ago, I led a group of scientists that published an article called Rebuilding Marine Life, where we put forward a strategy to rebuild the abundance of marine life, that is, repairing the damage we've made in the oceans by 2050. And we can do that with 6 actions: protect species, protect spaces, restore actively, harvest wisely, remove pollution, and mitigate climate change. But when they ask me what is the biggest threat to the ocean, and I will even extend this to the biosphere and the planet, I say that the biggest risk is none of those 6. The biggest risk is that we give up on the hope that we can actually have a healthy planet to hand over to future generations. So please don't give up. Next slide. We actually have multiple problems that are linked. The IPCC developed a joint report with the IPBES, which informs the UN Biodiversity Convention in the same way that the IPCC informs the UNFCCC. And it was about the nexus between biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis. Those two are not independent, they're closely linked. And there's a third one that is linked, which is the food crisis. So looking at our Sustainable Development Goals, in fact, very sadly, over the last 3 years, all of the progress that was made in removing hunger has actually been reversed. And we are back to the same percent of the global population experiencing hunger today as we had in 2015. So this is unacceptable. And the reason for this is the combination of climate change, COVID, a pandemic, and conflicts and war. So now we have had 300 million people moving to hunger on the last 3 years. And on the bottom of this, there's a growing human population. So we cannot fix the problem by just looking at climate change and looking at carbon. We need to have a systemic change in the way we operate. We need a paradigm shift. Next slide, please. So we also have a generational shift, and I believe that in all of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I miss one that I believe is fundamentally important, which is youth. And youth is a nature-based solution. In fact, last year in Glasgow, I came to COP26 and I met a student of mine, 25-year-old, that had been doing work with me on actually tagging sharks and something like that. And I found she was negotiating for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and she was negotiating Article 6, some of the toughest discussions that happened last year. So I followed her to the negotiation room, and I saw that among all of the nations, there were only 8 delegations that had people on her generation. Only 8 delegations had people 25-year-old or so. And 7 of those were developing nations, and 1, Switzerland, also had 1 young person in the desk, but she was in the back. She was not taking the floor. And I pondered that it was unfair for the likes of me, mostly white males in their 60s, to sit in that room and negotiate climate, because what was being negotiated there, what is being negotiated here, is the future that they will live on. 2050 for me means nothing. I'll be probably sequestering carbon and contributing to sequester carbon below ground by then. So really what is meaningful is for young people, we are planning their future. They need to be in the table. We heard them on the streets. They want to be part of the solution. They want to be heard. But rather than keep them on the streets, we should give them a place in the table and mentor them to understand the complexities, to overcome the difficulties. But the negotiation belongs to them, not to me. So myself and the likes of me, my generation, baby boomers, are actually responsible for much of the problem. Half of the global extinctions of species happened during my lifetime, and half of cumulative greenhouse emissions have happened during my lifetime. I tell my students that they are the generation that are slowing down the problem. They are slowing down emissions, they are slowing down biodiversity loss, and they're managing to slow down the pressures. But I look, sorry. I look at my grandson, Oliver, and I think that they are the generation that are going to do the job to repair the planet. And this is the paradigm shift. Everybody talks about the 4th Industrial Revolution. It is about robotics, it's about big data, it's about sensor technologies, it's about artificial intelligence. But what is it that we're doing with those technologies? So I believe that planetary repair might actually be the goal of the 4th Industrial Revolution, and doing so might activate the economy, may create wealth, may create jobs, and rather than leave behind a legacy of empty warehouses and pollution, it can leave a planet that will be livable for many generations to come. So this is my vision for a paradigm shift. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much, Carlo, and everyone. It has been a very interesting panel, so I have several questions for all of you. First of all, Emily, I was thinking in all the things that you explained that you were doing in Université Côte d'Azur, and I wonder if you have found the way to work with the industry, the local industry at least, in order to cross the frontiers of the university and try to promote this knowledge outside.
Yes, thanks. So far we are more promoting. Yeah, okay. We are more the example we are using are more used and are inspiration for we mean the academic and more the civil society and the cities and so on. For the industry, we started some links, but it's still on progress. and because we still want to have more research on the experiments we are doing in order really to test the university as really as a field of experimentation and to measure the changes, see how it will work and so on. So we still have to work on that, but yeah. So for example, for the composting project and so on, we have linked with industry and for example for food for future and so on. So yeah, but we still have some work to do.
Thank you. I was asking that to Emily Telma because in economic, I'm an economist, and we always learn at school, at university, that the economy tries to solve a scarcity problem. And obviously, according to what Carlos said, we have a problem and we need the economy to discuss with the nature, no? So I wonder, you talk about the change of paradigm and how we have to see this, and I wonder what is happening with the finance today.
Think, for instance, what is needed in terms of finance to address climate change annually. We are talking about trillions of US dollars. We're not talking about the 200 billion that, the Green Climate Fund has put forward, and that is not even working properly, I would say, okay? So, but, there are lots of changes that need to happen. If we think about the developing countries, when IPCC came up with the mitigation report and talking about all the opportunities that exist in all sectors. And by the way, there is a very strong statement in the IPCC that says that we have in place today options to halve the emissions by 2030 compared to 2019. But then, if those options are there, why don't we do it? And then, obviously, you have many barriers for them. And for developing countries, the main barrier continue to be financing, unfortunately. But it's not solely finance. Sometimes people say, well, there it comes again, developing countries asking for money. But that's not the only thing. You need also other very important barriers, institutional barriers that depends very much on the own country, developing the legislation, developing the conditions to motivate, including the private sector, to be a partner into these initiatives, right? And you are talking about technological changes that obviously exist, especially for the industry to decarbonize. It's going to be a challenge for them, but you also have social cultural barriers. And when I discussed about, is it easy to do changes? Never easy to do changes. It is very, it takes a lot. If everybody at least would be in the same understanding that climate change is a fact, observational fact, but you don't even have that. You still have people that are skeptic about their own existence of climate change. So when you're talking about a paradigm shift, you need to have a collective effort if you want really to do that shift in a way that everybody's engaged to have a new way of thinking, a new way of behaving, a new way of looking how nature can be partner of us into this venue.
Carlos Telma just mentioned the fact that usually countries has a lot of legislation that doesn't help to fight with climate change. And I was wondering, with your experience helping different governments, usually in our countries, in developed country, the poor thematic compete with the climate change carpet. You see, always government has to choose between invest either in education, in health, instead of climate change, without considering the interconnection you have between climate change and all the sectors. So how can we move to that change of paradigm in the sense of making a decision maker understand that the climate change is not a sectoral issue, means environment, but it's a whole and multidimensional perspective.
Yes, in fact, that's a very important problem because we have parceled out our problems into boxes, into buckets, and we look at them in isolation. And what I was arguing is that we need to look at the whole array of challenges that await the world in terms of meeting our food requirements to maintain ourselves healthy and a healthy planet that supports healthy livelihoods. So we actually need to look at the whole array of UN Sustainable Development Goals. So recently there's been some criticism to the UN Sustainable Development Goals because they are not integrated, but in my opinion they have really helped advance the paradigm shift from just looking at climate or just looking at biodiversity, from looking at the whole array of benefits that we need to achieve. And in my opinion, we need to always focus on the array of benefits that target multiple UN Sustainable Development Goals, not just climate. And I see a lot of minds that are carbon-centric, so when they see a tree, they see carbon. When they see a whale, they see carbon, but there's a lot more to nature and to our planet than carbon. So I think we need to be more holistic in the way we look at the problem. And for instance, I think there's huge value for developing nations in the concept of blue natural capital. So I don't want to preempt the conversation that is happening in the next panel, which is ecosystem services. But I believe I was discussing with an economist, Ralph Chamy, that you also know yesterday, because his work is on fragile economies. So he studies the economies of countries that are in war, in conflict, in civil war. Those are called fragile economies. And I was telling Ralph that the fragile economy of today is nature. So nature is a fragile economy, and we need to give nature an economy that is robust and resilient. And the way we do that is allowing nature to pay for itself. So recognizing the value of blue natural capital and the benefits that it brings to people in terms of food security, climate services, and also supporting well-being and even maintaining our communities healthy is fundamentally important. And I see some developments that are encouraging. So I'm hopeful, and I see some delegates from the nation of Bahamas in the room. The Bahamas are now the wealthiest nation in blue carbon in the world, with the discovery last week of the largest seagrass meadow in the world, 92,000 square kilometers. That makes them the wealthiest nation in the world in blue natural resources. So the fact that we're talking about blue carbon, which now can generate credits that can be traded in the market, and the Bahamas has generated a very sophisticated carbon trading mechanism, is also a paradigm shift if we think about it. Because it's the first time in Western history, in other cultures, that is not a problem, but in Western history, the marine life doesn't have a value unless we kill it. So fish don't have a value while alive. They only have a value when we bring them to the market and kill them. Mangroves have no value, only when we log them and transform them into wood. But for the first time with blue carbon, there's actually monetary value in restoring ecosystems and in avoiding losses of ecosystems. And I think that's one small step towards recognizing the value of nature. And it's only when we give nature its value that we will be able to formulate the new economy that we are discussing here.
Thank you.
Now it's working again, sorry. Francisca, you were talking about the change of paradigm and the role of the private sector. I would like about your testimony, because we know that usually entrepreneur doesn't take into account the natural context where they develop. What do you think that the world needs in order to change this paradigm in the private sector in particular, to make them understand their importance and how they can make the change and the difference?
I think that it's a very good question. the role of private sector nowadays is something that's really fundamental, because the responsibility, it's not only of the leaders of the world, but also from the private sector, because it has a certain independence that the enterprise, the industry sector needs to speak up in a way and recover that role and that damage that has made. So we could look at it in that way. Regardless, all the changes that we know that we need to make in the political world, in the private world, in education. Finally, the big change, thinking about it collectively. We are called to change the paradigm, and shifting this means changing the way we think, change the lens in which that we use to see the world. So that's it. The private world, not only the private world, but everyone needs to see the world, stop seeing the world as a resource, extractive resource, but also start respecting and giving the ecosystemic value that it has in itself. And that's the big responsibility of the private sector.
Thank you very much. I don't know if the public, someone from the public has a question. Otherwise, we're going to close that panel, this very interesting panel, because we have to start the other one. So thank you very much, all of you. And thank you, the public also. We invite you to stay to the next panel, who is going to start in 5 minutes, about blue economy and the marine ecosystem services.
Se pierde un poco la emoción, sí. Ahora igual lo estamos grabando en streaming, después lo vamos a sacar y bueno, sí, yo creo bonito. Y primera vez que... Sí.